The Trump administration saying the use of the U.S. military to acquire Greenland is, quote, always an option, as the president sets his sights on the Danish territory.
We need Greenland from the standpoint of national security, and Denmark is not going to be able to do it.
The new White House statement saying specifically the president and his team are discussing a range of options to pursue this important foreign policy goal. And of course, utilizing the U.S. military is always an option at the commander-in-chief's disposal. On Capitol Hill overnight, members of both parties pushing back when asked about the statement from the White House about the use of military force. House Speaker Mike Johnson weighing in. Asked if Secretary of State Marco Rubio informed lawmakers during a classified briefing on Monday that Trump preferred to buy Greenland.
I don't remember that if he said. He might have said it in jest or something.
Republican Congressman Blake Moore and Democratic Congressman Steny Hoyer, co-chairs of the bipartisan Congressional Friends of Denmark caucus, releasing a joint statement saying saber-rattling about annexing Greenland is needlessly dangerous. Greenland is an independent territory within the Kingdom of Denmark, rich in rare earth minerals. The island is also strategically positioned to counter rivals like Russia and China, which have been building up a military presence in the Arctic. The Pentagon already operates a base in Greenland and has deployed some 200 troops to enforce Arctic security as part of a long-standing defense agreement. Now, European leaders are incensed. The Danish government issuing a joint statement with the leaders of France, Germany, Italy, Poland, Spain, and the UK saying Greenland belongs to its people. It is for Denmark and Greenland, and them only, to decide on matters concerning Denmark and Greenland. Denmark, which controls the independent territory, is a close NATO ally, a country that came to America's aid in the wake of 9/11. And if Greenland were attacked, the entire NATO alliance would be forced to respond.
If Greenland were attacked by a hostile force to NATO, say the Russians, hypothetically, the entire alliance, including the United States, as well as Poland and Italy and others, would be compelled to respond. So the argument that we need Greenland for national security doesn't hold water.
4 days ago, the U.S. launched military operations in Venezuela. Today, Trump is threatening military action against Denmark. Not a dictatorship, not a rogue state. Denmark, a NATO ally we've stood with for 75 years. The White House confirmed it yesterday. Press Secretary Caroline Leavitt stated that utilizing the U.S. military is, quote, always an option at the commander-in-chief's disposal, end quote. Secretary of State Marco Rubio says Trump wants to buy Greenland, but he won't rule out using force to take it. And here's where it gets interesting. Even Trump's own congressional leaders are publicly breaking with him. House Speaker Mike Johnson said, quote, we're not at war with Greenland, end quote, and added he doesn't think anybody's seriously considering military action. Senate Majority Leader John Thune pushed back too. When the Republicans who just defended the Venezuela invasion won't defend this, that tells you everything about how far Trump has gone. 7 European nations issued a joint statement warning against this. Denmark's prime minister said if the United States attacks Greenland, quote, everything stops, end quote. She means NATO could effectively end. France and Germany are reportedly discussing contingency scenarios in case Trump actually moves. We're watching the Western Alliance prepare for the possibility of war with America. All right, this is the story of how the Venezuela operation emboldened Trump to threaten the entire NATO alliance, how his own party is finally saying he's gone too far, and what happens when a president learns that military force abroad has no consequences. Stay with me here because this gets worse. Let's be clear about what happened yesterday. This wasn't Trump spitballing on social media. The White House press secretary stood at the podium and confirmed that military action against Greenland is on the table. That's official U.S. policy now. When Leavitt said military force is always an option at the commander-in-chief's disposal, she wasn't hedging. She didn't say it's unlikely or a last resort. She said it's always an option. That's the same language you use when you're keeping all possibilities open, including invasion. Marco Rubio tried to dress it up as a potential purchase. Trump wants to buy Greenland, he said. But when pressed on whether the administration would use military force if Denmark refuses to sell, Rubio wouldn't rule it out. That's not a negotiation. That's an ultimatum backed by the threat of violence. And then there's Trump's own timeline. He said, quote, "We won't worry about Greenland in about 2 months," end quote. Not, "We'll negotiate for 2 months." Not, "We'll keep talking." "We won't worry about it." That phrasing suggests resolution by force. March 2026. That's the window Trump is giving himself to seize Greenland or secure it through coercion. Stephen Miller, one of Trump's closest advisors, was even more explicit. He said, quote, "Nobody's going to fight the United States militarily over the future of Greenland," end quote. That's not analysis. That's a threat. Miller is daring Europe to respond, betting that NATO countries won't actually defend Denmark because they know they'd lose a war with the United States. Think about what that means. The White House isn't just considering military action. They've gamed it out. They've calculated that Europe will fold rather than fight. They're confident enough to say it out loud. This is threat diplomacy in the open, and it's coming 4 days after the U.S. launched operations in Venezuela with no congressional authorization and faced no consequences. Danish Prime Minister Mette Frederiksen didn't mince words. If the United States attacks Greenland, everything stops. That's her phrase. Everything stops. She's talking about what would likely be the end of NATO, the collapse of 75 years of alliance between North America and Europe, the destruction of the security architecture that's kept the peace since World War II. And she's right about the stakes. NATO's entire foundation is Article 5, the Mutual Defense Clause that says an attack on one member is an attack on all. If the United States attacks Denmark, what happens to Article 5? Does NATO invoke it against its own largest member? Does the alliance declare war on America? Of course not. The system would break. NATO would effectively die. That's not hyperbole about the stakes. If America can attack a NATO ally with impunity, then Article 5 becomes meaningless in practice. Every NATO country suddenly realizes the alliance only protects them from non-American threats. Poland can't count on NATO if Russia invades, because what if America decides Poland's territory is strategically valuable too? Security experts warn the deterrent would collapse. The trust would evaporate. The alliance could become a dead letter. 7 European nations understood this immediately. France, Germany, the United Kingdom, Italy, Poland, Spain, and Denmark issued a joint statement declaring that Greenland belongs to its people. That list is remarkable. You've got 3 nuclear powers. You've got Germany, Europe's economic engine. You've got Poland, usually the most pro-American country in Europe. When Poland and France agree on something, you know it's serious. This is Europe unified against the United States in a way we haven't seen in generations. And it's not just rhetoric. France and Germany are reportedly discussing contingency scenarios for potential U.S. military action in Greenland. We don't know all the details, but the options being examined likely include naval deployments to the North Atlantic, air defense coordination, economic sanctions against the United States, freezing American assets in Europe, ending intelligence sharing, and expelling U.S. military bases from European soil. These are the kinds of scenarios you examine when you're preparing for a potential conflict with a country you used to call an ally. French President Emmanuel Macron has been pushing European strategic autonomy for years. The idea that Europe needs its own military capability independent of the United States. A lot of European leaders resisted that because they didn't want to undermine NATO. Well, if Trump seizes Greenland, Macron gets to say, "I told you so." Europe will militarize, and it will do so specifically to defend itself from American aggression. That's the world Trump is creating. Here's what makes this moment different from Venezuela. House Speaker Mike Johnson, one of Trump's most loyal allies, publicly contradicted the White House. He said we're not at war with Greenland, and added that he doesn't think anybody's seriously considering military action. That's a direct rebuke of the press secretary's statement that military force is always an option. Senate Majority Leader John Thune also pushed back on the threats, according to multiple reports. Thune isn't a never-Trumper. He's mainstream Republican leadership. If he's breaking with Trump on foreign policy, that signals cracks in the congressional GOP's willingness to back unlimited executive military action. You're probably wondering why Republicans who defended the Venezuela operation are suddenly growing a spine over Greenland. 3 reasons. First, NATO is sacred to the Republican Party in a way Venezuela never was. These are Cold War conservatives who grew up believing the Western alliance kept the Soviet Union in check. They see NATO as America's greatest geopolitical achievement. Threatening to destroy it for territorial gain crosses a line that invading a socialist government in South America just doesn't. Second, Europe is unified in opposition. 7 major nations speaking with one voice is hard to ignore. When your closest ally, the United Kingdom, signs a statement against you, that's a problem. When Poland, the most pro-American country in Eastern Europe, joins that statement, Republicans can't dismiss it as European weakness. This is their team saying stop. Third, this is politically toxic. The 2026 midterms are approaching. Suburban swing voters who decide elections aren't going to rally around a president threatening war with Europe. The attack ads write themselves. Trump wanted to invade our allies. Republicans care about self-preservation, and defending a war with Denmark isn't a winning message. But let's be honest about the limits of this pushback. Johnson and Thune expressed concern. They didn't introduce legislation to constrain Trump's war powers. They didn't threaten to defund military operations in Greenland. They didn't even hold a hearing. This is rhetorical opposition, not structural accountability. And Trump knows the difference. Now here's where the pattern becomes clear, and this is crucial. 4 days ago, the U.S. launched military operations in Venezuela without congressional authorization. The War Powers Resolution requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours and get authorization within 60 days. Trump appears to have ignored that requirement. He openly stated the operation was about securing Venezuela's oil, which legal experts argue violates international law. The UN condemned it. Constitutional scholars called it an overreach, and nothing happened. Congress didn't stop them. Republicans defended it or stayed silent. Democrats condemned it but couldn't muster the votes to force withdrawal. The Supreme Court, having already granted Trump broad immunity in the presidential immunity case, wasn't going to intervene. The international community issued statements but took no action. Trump learned he could deploy military force to a sovereign country, state his motives openly, and face 0 consequences. Now, 4 days later, he's threatening a NATO ally. That's not a coincidence. That's what emboldening looks like. Venezuela was the test case. If military action in a South American country brought no consequences, what else becomes possible? Greenland has rare earth minerals, strategic Arctic access, and military value. If international law didn't constrain Venezuela, why would it constrain Greenland? Stephen Miller's comment that nobody's going to fight the United States militarily reveals how senior advisors are thinking about this. They're betting that Europe, like the international community over Venezuela, will condemn but not act. They're gambling that NATO countries will choose alliance survival over defending Denmark. They think Article 5 is a bluff. Whether that calculation is correct remains to be seen, but it shows the White House believes it can act with impunity. And Trump has a timeline. 2 months, he said, That's March 2026. That's before the midterm campaigns really heat up. That's before any legal challenges could wind through the courts. That's before Congress, even if it found the will, could organize effective opposition. Strike while the Venezuela operation distracts, while Europe is still debating contingency plans, while Republicans are still figuring out their position. That's the window. What could actually happen in 2 months? A few scenarios seem possible. 1. A naval blockade of Greenland to prevent Danish reinforcement, framed as peacekeeping or security operations. 2. Backing a Greenlandic independence movement and then accepting an invitation from a newly declared government, the same playbook used in countless coups. 3. A direct ultimatum to Denmark. Sell Greenland by this date or we take it. If Denmark refuses, U.S. press, forces seize key installations, and the world wakes up to a fait accompli. The more I look at this, the clearer it becomes that Venezuela wasn't just about oil. It was about testing the system. Can a president use military force without congressional approval? Yes. Can he admit illegal motives? Yes. Will anyone stop him? No. Now he's applying those lessons to a much bigger target, and the stakes are exponentially higher. Let's talk about why Trump wants Greenland, because the strategic logic matters even if the method is insane. Greenland is the world's largest island. It sits between North America and Europe, controls access to the Arctic Ocean, and is becoming more strategically valuable every year as climate change opens new shipping routes and exposes resources. The United States already has Thule Air Base in Greenland. Established in 1951, it's a critical installation for missile warning systems and Arctic surveillance. We have access. We have cooperation with Denmark. But Trump doesn't just want access. He wants ownership. Greenland has massive deposits of rare earth minerals, which are essential for modern technology and weapons systems. China currently dominates the rare earth market, and breaking that monopoly is a genuine strategic interest. Greenland also has potential oil and gas reserves, though most are unexplored. There's uranium. There's fresh water from melting ice sheets. In terms of resources, Greenland is valuable. The Arctic is also the new great power competition frontier. Russia is expanding its Arctic military presence. China is investing in Arctic shipping and resource extraction. From a pure strategic standpoint, the United States has an interest in securing Arctic access and preventing adversaries from dominating the region. But here's the thing. Denmark cooperates with U.S. security interests. Greenland has autonomy within the Kingdom of Denmark and could theoretically vote for full independence if its people chose. There are pathways to expanded U.S. access that don't involve threatening invasion. Trump could negotiate an expanded lease for Thule. He could offer economic investment in exchange for resource agreements. He could support Greenlandic self-determination and build a relationship with an independent Greenland if that's what Greenlanders want. Instead, he's threatening military force against a NATO ally. That choice reveals something important. This isn't actually about strategic necessity. It's about power. It's about taking something because you can. It's about a president who believes immunity protects him from domestic prosecution. Venezuela showed him international law doesn't matter, and his party won't constrain him, even when he threatens allies. Let's game out what happens if Trump follows through. If U.S. forces move on Greenland, Denmark would invoke Article 5. NATO faces an impossible choice. Activate collective defense against the United States, which means declaring war on your own largest member, or refuse to honor Article 5, which analysts warn could render the alliance effectively dead. NATO would almost certainly choose the second option, because the first is unthinkable. No European country wants to fight the United States. France and the UK have nuclear weapons, but they're not going to use them over Greenland. Germany has a formidable economy, but a relatively small military. None of them can win a military confrontation with America, and they know it. So NATO would likely die in practice, if not in name. The understanding that Article 5 doesn't protect you from internal threats would fundamentally undermine the alliance. Every NATO country would recalculate its security. Eastern European nations would wonder if America will defend them from Russia or decide their territory is strategically valuable. European leaders warn this could effectively end the 75-year alliance that kept the peace in Europe. Russia benefits enormously from this scenario. Vladimir Putin has wanted NATO destroyed since he came to power. If Trump accomplishes that for him, Russia gains a free hand in Eastern Europe. Ukraine would likely lose American support and fall. The Baltic states would become vulnerable. Putin would get everything he's wanted without firing a shot. China benefits too. If the United States is tied up in an Arctic confrontation with former allies, China has space to move on Taiwan. If America is isolated from Europe, China faces less coordinated opposition to its expansion in the Pacific. Trump's Greenland adventure would hand strategic victories to America's two primary adversaries, and the global order based on international law, already weakened, would die completely. If the United States can seize territory from allies by force, what's the precedent? Might makes right. We're looking at a return to great power territorial competition, and that path historically leads to catastrophic conflict. I want to be careful here, because Trump is not Hitler, and historical analogies have limits. But pattern recognition matters. In the 1930s, revisionist powers tested the international order with incremental aggression. Each successful violation emboldened the next, until the system collapsed into World War. The pattern was test the system, gauge the response, escalate if there are no consequences, bet that others will always choose peace over confrontation, and keep going until you're stopped by force. Trump's pattern shows similarities. Launch military operations in Venezuela, face minimal consequences, threaten Greenland, gauge the response. Miller's comment that nobody's going to fight reveals they're betting Europe will fold. That's the same calculation that led to catastrophe in the past. What makes this particularly dangerous is that in the 1930s, the aggressors were enemies of the democratic West. Today, the potential aggressor is the United States, the country that built the post-World War II order. If America abandons that order, there's no one to enforce it. The whole system would collapse. At the deepest level, this is about what Trump believes presidential power means. The Supreme Court's immunity decision told him he can't be prosecuted for official acts. Venezuela told him he can deploy military force abroad with minimal constraints. His own party's muted response told him congressional oversight is weak if he has enough Republicans scared of his base. Now he's testing whether he can threaten a NATO ally. If he can, if Europe folds and NATO survives only in name, and Republicans express concern but don't act, then Trump learns the presidency is effectively unlimited in foreign policy. The commander-in-chief can use military force anywhere, anytime, for any reason, and no institution can stop him. That's not the presidency the Constitution created. That's not the presidency that served within the checks and balances of congressional war powers and international treaties and alliance obligations. That's an imperial presidency unconstrained by law, norms, or allies. That's a president who views other countries, including allies of 75 years, as resources to be exploited or territories to be seized based solely on his assessment of American interests. And here's the thing that terrifies me most. Trump is doing this in the open. The White House confirmed military action is an option. Stephen Miller openly stated that Europe won't fight. Trump gave a specific timeline. This isn't hidden. This isn't covert. This is a president who believes he can threaten an ally publicly, and the threat itself will work because everyone knows he might follow through. That's what Venezuela taught him. Make the threat explicit, carry it out if necessary, face no consequences. Repeat with a bitter target. We're watching escalation in real time, and the pattern only stops if someone stops it. Let me be absolutely clear about where we are. The President of the United States is threatening military action against Denmark, a NATO ally, to seize Greenland. The White House confirmed this is official policy. Europe is unified in opposition and reportedly examining military contingencies. Even Trump's own congressional leaders are publicly breaking with him. And we have a 2-month timeline before Trump says we won't worry about Greenland anymore. This isn't hypothetical. This isn't distant. This is happening right now, and the consequences of Trump following through could be catastrophic. NATO could effectively end. The Western alliance could collapse. Russia and China would benefit enormously. International law would be effectively dead, and the precedent would be set that might makes right. The Venezuela operation appears to have emboldened this. 4 days between launching military action in one country and threatening an ally. 4 days between facing minimal consequences and escalating to a threat that could destroy 75 years of peace in Europe. That's how fast this is moving. The question now is whether anyone stops it. Congressional Republicans express concern, but will they actually constrain presidential war powers? Europe is examining contingency scenarios, but will they actually follow through if Trump calls their bluff? The American people are watching their president threaten allies, but will they demand accountability? Because if the answer to all those questions is no, if Trump faces no real consequences here, the way he faced minimal consequences over Venezuela, then we've learned something terrible about the world we live in. We've learned that meaningful constraints on presidential war powers are weak. We've learned that alliances could mean less if the strongest partner can threaten them without repercussions. We've learned that international norms are fragile, and we've learned that escalation only stops when someone is willing to impose real costs. Trump said 2 months. That's the clock. March 2026. That's when we find out if the post-World War II order survives, or if we're entering a new era where American presidents can threaten allies and face insufficient constraints. The next 2 months could determine the next several decades of global politics. And right now, Trump thinks he's going to win. Thanks for spending a few minutes digging into this with me. If you want more grounded, progressive commentary without the outrage bait, subscribe and stick around. Every time you watch, share, and engage, it helps build a community that believes democracy is worth understanding and defending. I'll see you in the next video.